Good afternoon. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Mo Wright, immediate past chair of the Board of Trustees. It's so good to see all of you on this warm day here in Columbus. In fact, I was thinking about taking a run after this. If anybody wants to go with me, you are welcome to come and join me. Thank you on behalf of the board for being here. Important conversation for our community, so we're going to jump right in here in just a minute. And so today's forum, entitled Transportation's Micro and Macro Challenges, is presented by the Robert Weiler Company, as well as our friends at MS Consultants, represented here by their many friends and associates. Let's thank them for their support of today's forum. We all know that transportation is fundamental to survival. For the last 80 years, automobiles have pretty much dominated how we get from here to there. How many of you drove here today, even? That's right, most of us probably drove here today. I see the folks at COTA. I was looking for who raised their hands. Hey, Joanna. Cars and roads are expensive, though, but as individuals and as a society, we really don't have much of a choice sometimes. With few exceptions, we need a car to survive. As our region's population grows, though, as boomers grow older and can't drive, as younger generations like my daughter don't want to drive, which I've yet to understand, but and infrastructure needs are at a critical tipping point, we're in a unique point in our history. These present both micro and macro challenges in this whole idea of transportation. So today we're going to explore some of these issues, and we're going to welcome these experts on our panel. First, we have Doug Arseneault, Public Affairs Administrator at Central Ohio Transit Authority. Let's welcome him. Co-founder and CEO of Share, we have Ryan McManus with us. President and Director of Sales and Marketing at Ricart Automotive Group, we have Mr. Rick Ricart. And our host journalist today from the Columbus Business First is Carrie, Ghose. Carrie, the podium is yours.
All right. All right, so I want to do the reverse of what Mo did. Show of hands, who rolled in here on the bike trail? Who took a COTA? One. You ruined my joke, but I mean, all you got to do is stop at Broad and walk over that terrifying kind of one-lane bridge on Souder. Piece of cake, right? So if we look at the U.S. Census in Metro Columbus, 80% of commutes are by single occupant vehicle. And that was unchanged. I checked 2017 back to 2010, unchanged. So we have 1 million more people moving to Central Ohio or being born. The population is going to grow by 50% in the next 30 years. How will we get around? I mean, you think 315 suffers from arterial plaque now. It'll be a major infarct. That's a real medical term. So, and the number of licensed drivers in Ohio is actually going up. You know, there's the national trend of young people don't want to get licensed, but look back the last 5 years, the number of 16, 15, or 15-year-olds who are licensed went up. There's one 14-year-old licensed in Ohio. Look out. So for our panelists, who are your customers, and how is that changing as the population ages and as personal preferences for mobility are changing?
So I used to think that, you know, we had to go and get somebody out of a car they're driving to get them to be a customer of our service. And what we've found over the last 2 years of building Share is that there's a huge group of people that just don't have reliable transportation. And so that ranges the gamut to the young that don't have access to a school bus, or to the old that may live in an area that doesn't have access to the bus. And so I look at my customers today are not driving.
Well, obviously that, you know, from the franchise dealership side, we've already seen this kind of new owner, and there's less private vehicle ownership. there's a number called the SAR index of how many new cars are sold in the United States each year. That number has been fairly steady the past few years, and it doesn't seem to be declining at a rapid rate, but how that number has been configured has been changed dramatically. And we're seeing less private retail sales and more fleet and commercial sales. And Ryan's a customer of mine, a friend, and also a resource I'm trying to learn from. How can we adapt our businesses to attack these challenges, find these new modes of transportation, whether it's people or things, because let's face it, it's not just people on the road that are commuting, it's everybody sitting at home waiting for things to be delivered to them. So there's an individual person driving a vehicle with one box in their back just to bring to your house.
It's everyone. Everyone are our customers. And this is why, there's all this talk about millennials and Gen Z and younger people and the boomers and the empty nesters that are coming back downtown into dense areas. And some of that is true, but when it really comes down to it, transportation is a conversation for everyone. And the question is, how do we make the transportation system work for everyone? And that's about convenience and accessibility. Make it convenient to use a shared use vehicle, whatever that looks like, whether that's share or an autonomous vehicle carrying multiple people, or using a scooter to connect in. But ultimately, the transit system, our system, COTA, is the backbone of our transportation system. The other backbone is the freeway system, which was built in the 60s to solve this need to make it as fast as possible you can drive down the road. Well, as we're already seeing on 670, on 315, on 70, how many people, I like audience participation too, how many people were stuck in traffic this morning? For those of you that were stuck in traffic, super fun, right? For those of you not stuck in traffic, you're like, well, thank God it's so cold, people aren't going to work, right? Yeah. So something I was sharing with some folks is, we talk about this big number in 2050 that there's going to be 1 million new people, right? But everyone, or at least half the people I talk to, say, it's 2050. I'm going to be dead, or I'm not going to be driving. Well, let's think about it this way. There are 86, I believe, or 89 people moving into Central Ohio every single day. If we're relying on cars, that's 89 single occupancy vehicles. So for those of you not stuck in traffic, you will be with 90 people in front of you. So we've got to talk about how we can revolutionize our existing infrastructure to support more people. And no offense to Rick, but we need to prioritize people over cars, because cars take up a lot of darn room and people take up very little. So how do we get folks moving in the smallest possible way or in the most efficient way? And at the end of the day, some of you who are pro-transit enthusiasts, you see the GIF thing where you've got 60 cars and then you've got this many bicycles and then you have a bus that can carry, 2 buses can carry 60 people comfortably. That's 60 cars, if they're driven alone, off the roadway. That's how we solve this challenge. So, those are some initial thoughts.
Plus, at the same time, keeping it affordable.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of the new, whether it's car sharing, ride sharing, other alternative transportation, mobility options that are coming in the future, if it's just businesses creating them to create massive profit centers, it's not going to help the human element of it. So the most important thing is not to wait till 2050 to tackle this problem. It's for any leaders of the transportation in this whole room to come together and let's sit down and talk and collaborate and figure out what the roles that each person and each company plays to make sure that in the future there is good there's good options, whether it's the bicycle, the scooter, the electric motorcycle, to the autonomous car, up to all the way up to the bus to handle those mass transit areas, and how does each one fit? Because there's people coming from 30, 40 miles away to commute into downtown Columbus. What happens with their first mile to 10 miles? And what about that last mile? And what other options could be available that we haven't even thought of yet? And that's really what the challenge is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's 32,000 carless households in Columbus. That's 9% of the population. And as we can hear, the answer is not give them cars. But COTA did its best redesigning its routes a couple years ago, but it's still, 800 square miles they're trying to serve. And there are still places that you can't get there from here unless it's 3 hours and 5 transfers. So how can we get people from where they live to where the jobs are? And can transportation be used as an equalizer?
Well, again, this comes back to convenience and accessibility. It also comes from making those choices today, to Rick's point, to support a system that works long-term. So that looks like making some bold leadership decisions that mean focusing on multimodalism. This is why I've got my notes, because I was brainstorming yesterday. What are some of the policy changes we could make, right? It's about using public and private dollars and land use policy to build things like multimodal systems and accessible streets, reducing speeds, and I'm sure we'll touch on scooters soon, but it comes down to a safety conversation about why we have roadways that come through our cities that are 35, 45 miles an hour. People are trying to zoom through. We talk about 315 and about Olentangy River Road as the offloader, but I was there on a scooter last week and I was praying the whole time. I'll just put it that way. So we've got to build roads that have reduced speeds, that have sidewalks, that locate our job centers and our housing near each other. If one wants to move out to Delaware, God help them, and they want to work in Grove City, right? And they want to drive alone in their SOV, they can go for it. But at the end of the day, we've got to equalize how we invest in people and making sure that we're moving people and not just moving cars as fast as possible. And there's a bigger conversation about time, right? The number one thing we hear in transit is, well, I don't have time, or it takes too much time. Well, when we talk about driving, we talk about how do I have the quickest driving time? Well, when you're on a bus or you're using a transit vehicle or you're using share or maybe eventually autonomous vehicles, your time driving is 0. Someone else is doing the driving. You can use your time to be productive. And for those that are business-minded, it's I can do work, and some people are driving and they've got meetings going on in their car, but most people drive and listen to the radio or do something else. When you're on board a bus with our free Wi-Fi on every one of the buses, you can work, but you can also watch TV or play Candy Crush or do whatever you want to do. But when we talk about time, it comes down to how do we make commutes that are slow, short, and connected, as Laura Kaprowski, who was here a few months ago, talks about. How do we make it so that it's truly convenient and accessible to use other forms of transportation that aren't spending your time white-knuckled on your steering wheel trying to get where you need to go? And I know Rick gets it.
I get
We've
it
talked
because white knuckling is for the racetrack. I cannot wait for the day that an autonomous vehicle picks me up at my house, takes me to the dealership, and I can read a book as I'm riding in the car. That would be wonderful. But then on weekends, I'm going to get in a GT350 Shelby and go bang gears down the country roads, or get on my motorcycle and go adventure through the mountains of West Virginia, because that's what I love to do on my free time. So this is really an urban problem. There's, I think, 55% of the population is urban, and that number's rising. It's going to be 68% in the next 5 to 6 years. So it's the commute, it's the city, and I love the Smart City table being here, because working with them and trying to learn and be on the forefront of, is it the connected car, automated, shared services, and of course electric vehicles. And we know electricity is going to play a major role in this, because these fossil fuels and gas prices and energy crisis and pollution, environment, all those things. And there are some incredible plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles that are coming to market. There's some wonderful ones today. And trying to get the word out and the education and awareness that electric vehicles are not a bad thing. They're very exciting. They're fast. If you are an auto enthusiast, drive something with 100% electricity. It accelerates faster than most internal combustion engines do. And the future technology that's coming, I think everyone in this room will be very comfortable to own, drive, ride in something that's 100% electric in the next probably 3 to 5 years. It's going to be very, very, very exciting.
and I want to make sure that Ryan gets a chance to talk, but I'm just going to throw one thing out here, and that's when we talk about autonomous, we've got to be talking about shared autonomous. And the folks at Smart Columbus get this. You know, when we talk about autonomous, if all we are is trading vehicles that there's still one person in the vehicle, we're not making a difference. You're still going to be stuck in traffic, you know, but you're doing it in a large machine that isn't efficient, and it's going to take you a hell of a long time to get there. And again, I know Ryan gets that. That was my intro.
That's great.
Okay.
So I'll try to be brief while jumping on this. I think we're moving in a time from individual ownership to where mobility is a utility. And if there are 32,000 households, and while Rick would love to sell them all a car, he realizes that if he's doing that, he's taking 1/3 of their household income or more for them to have transportation.
The bank or finance institution.
Of course.
But it wouldn't be me.
Not directly. So as a community, we need to think about how do we shift the burden of transportation for these 32,000 households to who generates the demand for them to be out on the road. Well, sometimes it's their employer, their healthcare provider, their school, and those organizations get an economic benefit when that individual is able to get access. And so if we can flip this to where the demand generators are picking up portion of or all of the cost for that transportation, we can bring access to these 32,000 households and more. We just need them to change their behavior, plan ahead a little bit, and not to view getting a vehicle as the first thing they spend their money on.
Well, and this gets back to the Columbus Way that we all talk about, right? P3 projects are the future. How do we, in the private sector and in the public sector, work together to solve these challenges? You know, I was reading the Daily Reporter put out by CMC the other day, and they were talking about unemployment numbers are finally starting to, well, unfortunately, are starting to increase. There are only 3 sectors where they're not increasing: transportation, utilities, which a little bit of the same there, and technology. And so we've got to think about how are we getting people to the jobs in a way that is going to be convenient and accessible for them. And a big piece of that is about bold leadership. And COTA has already started this process, right? So between the C-Bus, which everyone has seen, I'm sure in downtown, our BRT bus rapid transit project, what we've done with redesigning our entire system, where we're headed with what we call our mobility as a service initiative, focusing on building the infrastructure and the technology and the partnerships that allow us all to work together to solve this challenge. Because you know, I've got many shout outs here in my talking points, but one of them that I want to touch on from a good private partner is Huntington. Huntington is a C-Pass participant. So for those of you that are not familiar, this is our Downtown Pass program working with Morpsey and downtown property owners to provide them passes. Huntington is a major contributor in the C-Pass project, even beyond what they contribute individual to their employees. But they located one of their main facilities right on our CMAX bus rapid transit line at the end of Cleveland Avenue, where it is there in the Northland community. And they're building, and I've got Tyler right here in front of me, so I'm going to give him a little shout out from Heinz, you know, is thinking about how do we provide that infrastructure, those facilities, to encourage folks to use multimodal transportation. That looks like bike and scooter racks, showers for those that are super riders like Tyler is, going down those trails, you know, investing in those places where people can get to. And I know that Ryan and Cher having conversations also with many companies about how do we fill this gap, this first mile, last mile gap, to leverage the publicly funded system that all of you are paying into every time you're grocery shopping or paying sales tax on everything. You might as well use the system, right? Those are my thoughts for now.
So we hear a lot about, you know, the end of the personal vehicle, and, you know, sales are dropping by 1%, right? But if we look at that 80% number, I just want to push back a little bit on how fast would this really happen? How, you know, will Central Ohio or the U.S. ever give up its very car-centric culture?
Well, yes, and part of it will be.
I was just waiting. I was setting you
Right,
up.
we were waiting for this
I was
thing,
setting you up.
right? Look, I mean, we talk about cars, but there's always going to be vehicles on the roadway. I mean, you know, we operate vehicles every day. It's our bread and butter, and it's what type of vehicle. To Rick's point, when we talk about autonomous, we talk about connected, we talk about larger vehicles and making them as efficient as possible. But you know, a couple years ago at our annual luncheon, Beth Osborne from Transportation for America, and for those of you that were there, she blew everyone's socks off. She's the former assistant director of US DOT, and she talked about this. She talked about how cities have made those smart investments. So places like Seattle and Los Angeles started making these investments in the 90s. They took a bold step, got funding, and started building out rail systems. And I'll touch on that. Columbus was also at that pinnacle point, but our voters decided not to go in that direction. So they've started this momentum. Denver and Tampa started in the 2000s to start investing in multimodalism, transit, microtransit, bike infrastructure. I mean, I was down in Tampa about a year ago, and I was blown away by what they're already doing. And then there's folks like Atlanta, who in the 1980s said, okay, we've got to do something. So they started to build out their rail system, and then they gave up, and they decided to build a second outer belt, you know, which is a conversation that's ongoing here in Columbus. And now they're facing huge health and funding and transportation. It's really a crisis. And I use that from folks that I've talked to in Atlanta. They actually invited me to go down to speak on a panel in Atlanta about what Columbus is doing to solve this challenge. So we've got to make some bold choices, and we've got to shift the paradigm. And speaking of bold leadership, Joanna Pinkerton, our president and CEO, is a bold leader. And we're looking forward to working together with bold leaders, both in the public and private sector, who can meet that new standard of being forward-thinking and figuring out how we shift that paradigm.
Rick, you had an emphatic no, though.
Well, I don't see the private vehicle ownership completely going away. Like I said, you're going to have enthusiasts. You're going to have, and if you look at what the value of franchises are in the future, the luxury brands are the ones that they're giving more of the props to, because the upper class, those that can afford it, automobiles may be strictly a luxury in the future. So how that trend happens, and we have to be realistic in our business also to sit here and think, no, none of this will happen. We'll just keep selling and leasing vehicles, and that's what we're known for and what I'm up here talking about a lot. But really, a lot of our relationship with this goes back to the service side and making sure, because if we have vehicles that are getting 100% usage, which right now the average vehicle only gets 5% usage. It sits parked while you're at work all day. While we're sitting here, they're parked in the parking lot. You go home, they're parked in the garage. So if that becomes 100%, things are going to wear out faster. Tires, brakes, all those moving parts, all the ride sharing, if they're on the road. Can we create 24-hour autonomous service centers to keep these vehicles on the road? The level of technician training and development that it takes to be able to repair these vehicles is something we have to stay on the forefront of. You know, we partner with a lot of the good local trade schools, developing techs, and that's a problem in our business today. We don't have enough technicians. We don't have enough young folks coming out willing to learn how to work on the skilled labor of today's automobile. And whether it's the buses or the commercial vehicles of the future, we have a responsibility to keep training and building that up, as well as investing in the we just bought a 113,000 square foot warehouse just to convert into a fleet service center and sit down with, you know, guys like Ryan and Doug and say, do we need to be open 24 hours a day? What does this look like? What kind of maintenance contracts should we be looking to doing? And so we can make sure that these vehicles stay on the road and they stay running. I drove in this morning and the topic on the radio was, you know, hey, make sure you have extra boots and blankets in your car in case your car breaks down on the side of the road so you don't freeze to death. And I read a couple weeks ago, Columbus City schools closed, and one of the reasons was over 100 buses couldn't start the night before. That boils my blood. I'm like, wait a minute. Can we get the insight on this so I can send some techs out there to work on these buses or do something? Because the most important thing to me than anything is making sure our kids get to school. And that's always been on the forefront of our mind. So if we can help assist, if we can be a part, if the vehicles that we have the privilege to sell and distribute can be a part of this future, and we can have the opportunity to help maintain them and the service and the safety and keep them on the road with tremendous reliability, then that's one role that I see immediately.
Yeah, and Rick is right. We're not going away from vehicles. I think we're shifting away from the single occupant, personally owned, vehicle, 3 cars in the garage, new car for the 16-year-old who gets their driver's license or doesn't get their driver's license anymore. There will always be vehicles. It's how we get where we go until we can teleport people places, So I think there's a huge opportunity from the vehicle perspective, but at the end of the day, again, it's that single occupancy vehicle that it's just not sustainable. Our roads can't handle it. And we can expand our freeways, and believe me, I lived in LA. You go down that freeway and it is 5 lanes in both directions and it is a monster. And how did they build that? They took away people's homes and they're still stuck in traffic. So how do we make the smart investments so that folks can use vehicles, but we're effective with how we use them, and we build infrastructure that can support all modes, right? Cars are always going to be part of the equation, but they're going to be part of the equation rather than, again, that 80%.
Vehicle ownership is going away, but driving is not. And it's because of data. That is the one reason why this will happen. Why do you think Google cares about autonomous vehicles? Because the time you're going to spend in it. When vehicles go from owned to subscribed, it's much clearer around who owns that data. And so while consumer preference may determine whether vehicle ownership changes in 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, it's coming, it's happening, these decisions are moving, and you will not own a car, but you may drive it, you may still have it, you may still go to get it from Ricart, and it's all bundled with your insurance. That will happen much sooner than autonomous vehicles.
So Ryan, especially for you, I mean, Car2Go could not make it in Columbus, Chariot couldn't make it, period. How do we move to ride sharing, but were they just too soon? I mean, that's what I'm pushing back. We say, okay, it's not sustainable, you can't do it. How?
So the future's multimodal. It's about trying multiple things. As a city, we all have to get more excited about new things that are here, and when something fails, we have to be more resilient and go try the next thing. I mean, we are so lucky to have the leadership of Smart Columbus in going out and being far ahead of what we're trying to do. Like, I started out by saying my customers aren't driving today, but they will be. Eventually, that will become my market. But I think as a city, we just have to try new things and bring somebody with you as you're trying these new things. It's going to be about word of mouth, and that's how we're going to trust these new types of services.
And it's about partnership, right? So I'm a big Ryan fan.
Thank you.
And Ryan and I talk sometimes multiple times a week about what partnership looks like. And it was great to meet Rick for the first time. I think we'll have many conversations because ultimately it's going to take all of us working together to solve this challenge. We talk about difficulties or things. It really is an opportunity to find new ways to invest and how we all work together. And that's really going to require true public-private partnership, 50-50 when it comes down to how do we make and allow people to move around our city? And how do we ensure that all the economic development that has sustained Columbus as this thriving region, how do we make it equitable for all? I love that our city council president here in Columbus talks about, or quotes, he's got a long story, but I'm going to keep it short, and it's that if it's not for all, it's not for us. And so we've got to be making policy decisions that support it being for all. And there are those that have been left behind. And how do we make sure that nobody's left behind? They didn't need to be left behind. But we have divided up communities historically with, yes, things like the freeway system, with redlining, with all of the historical issues that still resonate and still have after effects. I was talking to Andy before and about the way that the past continues to affect us. And it's funny when we think about the past because, there's these memes, these pictures that pop around the internet about how things that are old are new again, right? So there's a picture of someone from 1910 on an electric scooter and like, oh my God, it's a time traveler. No, it's that for so long we invested in our transportation system being multimodal, and then based on decisions, particularly at the federal level, we prioritize the single occupancy vehicle and to put everything on hold. So how do we come full circle? And the answer is technology. How do we make everything old and new again by leveraging technology to make it convenient and accessible for all?
So in about, well, now 4 minutes, we'll be taking questions. So if you want to start moseying towards the microphone, and don't be shy. You can do a better job at this than I can anyway. So I have one last thing, which you just nicely rolled into there, which is we did do all these investments in roads, bridges, and now that infrastructure is crumbling, and yet we have to invest in new infrastructure to rebalance towards this multimodal future. How do we, gas taxes, pay for that?
We should definitely get creative and think of as many options as we can. You know, I mean, there's got to be, you know, everyone has to participate in this. This is the future of everything. And, you know, I don't think the road system has to be widened or increased. I think we have to be smarter. We have to be more efficient as these connected cars start talking to each other, and we can get the roadway, and you don't have to guess whether there's going to be an open parking spot in a parking lot. Your car's going to know whether there's a parking spot open, so you're not trying to switch 4 lanes and tying everyone up. As we get the logistics and the efficiency down of moving vehicles around first, as we're increasing the electric vehicle usage on the road, I think that's one of the first steps. And then that way we don't hopefully have to look at it as a, you know, major multi-billion-dollar effort. If we can be smart and we can work together, there's an efficient way to make this happen.
I'm interested in helping by buying data. It'd be very interesting for me to be able to understand stoplight times so I can be building routes that put my vehicle somewhere faster. I can see a path where private operators are paying to be in a high-speed lane or a carpool lane. I think there's opportunities for the private sector to contribute here.
And COTA fully supports investing in our roads and bridges. You know, we recently supported the county's institution of a permissive fee to support our infrastructure that the Ohio State Legislature opened up to counties to do it. We at the local level have been investing in transportation in new and innovative ways because of the divestment over the last 8 years, primarily in local communities. So we agree with legislators on both sides of the aisle about leveraging technology and rewarding good fiscal actors. You know, I have conversations with the Greater Ohio Policy Council about how do we make those smart decisions. You know, and one model around the gas tax is what California did. And I know everyone says, oh, but that's California. Well, when you look at California, it's not all that different than Ohio. A lot of people are focused in those major cities, yes, and you know, we're the largest city in Ohio, and LA, where I used to live, was 10 million people, and we're, you know, approaching 2 million people. But when you scale up, you really think about the opportunity to do that. And what California did is they made those investments. And yes, they invested in roads and bridges, but they also put substantial funds into transit, bikes, and pedestrians, and matching funds for local communities to invest in innovative projects and to bolster and reward those that, like Central Ohio, have been smart about investing locally through tax levies and direct investment. But we've got to rethink the way that we approach user fees. The gas tax itself is an unsustainable source. It's the main source, absolutely, but it's unsustainable as we go electric. And there isn't a need for gas, you know, and then there's a conversation, well, do we tax electricity? Not great. We need to be making sure that those that are making smart choices, that are making efficient choices, reap the rewards and face the lowest costs. And those that choose to drive alone can, but there's going to be some impacts there. And they can make that choice to have that 30-minute, soon to be an hour and a half commute because they are not prioritized the way that they are currently, while we allow those that have made smart choices, companies that have invested with folks like Share, that work with COTA to be able to fill those mobility needs, to work with Ricart on providing those vehicles and being smart and fixing our roads, but also ensuring that all modes are at the table, not just the gas industry and automotive industry. You know, our folks at Ohio State, they get it. TRC is fantastic. The things that CAR is doing around investing in autonomous vehicles, they get it and they're working towards it, but it's gonna take all of us working together to get where we need to go. All of us here up at this table and all of you out there. And COTA wants to talk to you, so let's do that.
No more SUV shaming, no, it's SOV shaming. That's what I hear. All right.
It is CMC's tradition to take audience questions. If you step up to the microphone, please state your name and ask a question. Please avoid editorial comments, and remember, questions end with a question mark.
Hi, I'm Warren Fishman, and I really appreciate this conversation today. And you touched on different modes of transportation, and we just briefly touched on rapid transit. And Columbus is going to grow, Central Ohio is projected to grow 1 million people in the next few years. And at 30 people per bus, that's still a lot of buses on the road at 1 million people. And I'm almost embarrassed that we don't have rapid transit in Columbus, and I've spent some time in Portland. It's a joy. You can read a book a week, as my friend pointed out at the table, when you're riding rapid transit. And is there any chance, here's the question, that a rapid transit will be brought up again and perhaps pursued?
So, you know, we talk a lot about rapid transit, and I know that's a code word for rail because we have rapid transit. To be perfectly honest, we have our bus rapid transit line on Cleveland Avenue, which was our first investment. We've got our rush hour service, which leverages the freeway system to get people from park and rides downtown. We have rapid transit, and we can, but ultimately it comes down to dollars and cents. You know, the federal government, particularly currently, is looking to divest from states in how they fund these systems, which historically have been an 80-20 partnership. The federal government provides 80% of the funding, local and state money provides the other 20%. The Trump administration wants to flip that on its head. And they are really focused around the private sector filling some of that gap, but they want to see local communities do it. Frankly, Ohio was ahead of the buck in approaching this, and now we need to think about how do we create solutions that are going to be sustainable. Because you look at some of our legacy systems, DC, New York, LA to a certain degree, and they've got major O&M costs. They've got major operating and maintenance costs. So that's why at COTA, we've shifted this conversation, shifted gears, if you will, right? I love puns that have to do with transportation. Shifting to how do we solve that first last mile gap, right? So that we can be efficient. And there is absolutely no reason why we can't use buses to have rapid transportation, but we've got to build the infrastructure to support it, which looks like dedicated lanes running down major roadways, which is how BRT functions and why it's been so successful around the world. We've got to think about how we provide safe pedestrian infrastructure to get people where they need to go. Yeah, use a share vehicle to fill that first last mile. If you want to walk, we got to make it safe for you to walk where you need to. So it's about investing in that infrastructure that's going to support rapid transit and other ways that we can leverage our system that don't require you to come out of your garage into another garage and try and figure out how to get in between. Because as we talked about, it's just not going to be sustainable.
So you say rail system would not be sustainable?
A rail system could be sustainable, but we need to do it in a way where we make those bold choices to make it happen. So the major, and I don't want to get too technical here, but at the end of the day, it comes down to having dedicated right-of-way. So we are excited to talk with our public and private partners about what dedicated right-of-way can look like, but in the short term and to build sustainably, we want to make sure that we're leveraging the current system and making those investments that are those low-hanging fruit. Because I'll tell you right now, the major rail systems are all facing a first last mile challenge. They need the pedestrian infrastructure. They need microtransit to fill that gap, because one of the major components of a rapid transit line is it's got limited stops, and people have to be able to get to those stations. How do we get them from their homes and their workplaces out to those stations? And that's going to take forward-thinking motion, which is what our Mobility as a Service initiative is really focused on. How do we fill that first last mile?
Next question, please.
Hi. Not to argue with Doug, but it's so nice to fly to Chicago and pay $5 for a round-trip train ticket into downtown and back and wave at all the cars that are stuck on the highway. I don't think anybody goes to Chicago or New York and rents a car. I did that once 20 years ago. I'll never do it again. But my question is, I think smart cities had an element of genius in their grant proposal where they were hooking inner city neighborhoods where there were pockets of poverty historically to the rest of the city for health, education, vocational benefits. But then I heard here recently somebody from Smart Cities say they were going to let development patterns dictate not only the location but the mode of mass transit in the future. And I'm wondering, is that really the plan? Because that seems very counterintuitive and inefficient.
Well, I'm not from Smart Columbus, but what I will say is we work very closely with Smart Columbus on figuring out how we can ensure that those that are good economic development actors are building towards density and making sure that those connections are filled. You know, and there's a broader community conversation around how do we create aspects of density. And density can be a very dirty word if it's not done in a way that is sustainable. So how do we make sure that those investments in our inner ring of communities are accessible and convenient for people to get to and from? You know, something that I'll just throw out is we've got a great actor in Dublin. Dublin is investing in transportation. I know Joanne Shelley is out here, and I'm not just placating to her, but she's a fantastic actor because Dublin is making those smart choices by investing in microtransit to get people from their homes, from their businesses, to feed into key destinations and link up with the transit system. And they've made a really smart investment in microtransit through Share. Ryan agrees.
But I think in general, looking at what neighborhoods need, you can't say, well, this is what everybody in the state needs, this is what everybody in our city needs. If you really look at the individual needs of the neighborhood and then make mode-based decisions that way, I think we can get more to what our individual citizens need.
And again, lower speed streets. We've got to make it multimodal. We've got to make it safe for bikes, scooters, transit to be able to use our roadways. So that's going to take a hard look at how we approach speed limits. And that conversation's already happening with the advent of scooters. And the city of Columbus is making some really smart initial steps toward making it safe to use these other modes. Because again, it's not sustainable to have roadways that are prioritizing machines over prioritizing people.
You know, I think that one of the demise of the car-to-go in Columbus was that they were only offering smart cars. And those small automobiles, the people that I talked to, they weren't comfortable getting in them because of the roadways and the safety and the speeds. So to find something that someone's comfortable in, that they're willing to ride in, you know, just smaller doesn't always mean better. We got to make sure that we are safe in what we're riding in and that the consumer feels safe in whatever we're doing or, you know, offering to them. I love the new on I-670 and when I'm on there now, that how the median shifts and you've got the bus lane. And if there's a way to take that idea and technology and take that rapid transit idea, mix it with the fact that do we really need to put rails down because we're getting ready to have everything connected and autonomy close in the future. And that replaces the need for the rail, which was kind of the old way to think of autonomy because it couldn't go anywhere but that rail. So as we take that next leap in that, I think you'll see COTA and other players seeing some new alternative transportation vehicles that are going to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the vehicle's got to match the number of people in it.
Yeah.
You know, the smart car, the car-to-go was based on a model of being a single occupancy vehicle and making those trips. But things like car-to-go were immensely supportive for the transit system because they filled that gap. Look, I was one of the Car2Go super users because even though 80–90% of my trips, I used the COTA system, sometimes I got to pick up a bookcase at Target, you know, and it's pretty inconvenient for the other people on the bus if I'm carrying a bookcase. That's right. That's right. So I would get the smart car and I would take that short trip from my Target that was all of 1.5 miles away, and I would get back there, and we make it easy. So it's got to be approached. So I agree. I don't want to shame people that are in SUVs, but you better have 4 people on that vehicle, you know, to match the number of folks that even get close to a bus that's 40 feet and is carrying 40 people. That's 40 cars.
Name first and then question.
Yes, Renee Delane, and I just have a question. Looking around at the audience, as I do often, and many people that I know, respect, and am inspired by, we are still a very privileged elite group here. So when you're talking about organic way of spreading information and to get more buy-in from everybody, give us some ideas of how we can do that.
To get people to do what? What are you looking for them to do?
To spread the message more organically, so we get out of our circles that we often are in and get out of those areas of comfort zones and maybe bring up the ideas that, you know, community centers or, I don't know, the city government locally, you know, villages or whatever, so that we get more buy-in initially if people are more educated about it already.
Sure.
I
So
think she's asking you to deputize micro-modal marketers.
Oh, I'm happy to do that. And I know Ryan's got a lot of thoughts on this one. Just what I'm going to throw out is Ohio Loves Transit Week is coming up in 2 weeks. Get on a bus, take a picture, put it on LinkedIn, put it on Facebook. Say, I am walking the walk. I'm not just talking the talk. That's how we spread the message. And when you have positive experiences, which, you know, we provide 60 rides a day, 60,000 rides a day. We have a high number of folks that are very happy with their experience. In fact, our recent onboard survey showed that 94% of people surveyed would give us either a likes, good or very good in terms of what their experience is. So walk the walk. And ride CMAX particularly. And C-Pass. C-Pass, C-Max, C-Bus, C everything. And do you see the future?
And lease or buy an electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. If we're doing plugs, I'll keep going.
And
Great lease programs today. It's still more affordable than taking an Uber or Lyft everywhere.
And I think we need to stop saying this will be great for them, right? Ooh, this will be great if we make the transportation changes for the bus system for them. Think of yourself as a transit user or a mobility user, because your participation affects the rate of change. And if we want to see this city continue at this pace, we need you guys to change now.
There's no those people. There's the people. And we're all of them.
Right. Real quick, I see the co-founder of Columbus's other homegrown microtransit provider, PowerBus. So if you are employers looking for, you got 2 people to talk to now. Last question.
Good morning, Eric Davies, and before I ask my question, I should quickly qualify my answer to the earlier question about how did you get here. I was the only person that raised my hand saying I used COTA. I did not use COTA all the way here, because that would, of course, only got me to downtown. It does not directly serve Boathouse, but I took a taxi cab the rest of the way from downtown, so I brought rapid transit to downtown on the 2L, and I checked my email, and I read the newspaper, Doug. So.
First mile, last mile. That's
Absolutely.
what we're talking about.
And so I think Doug talked about how critical the last mile is, and I was going to ask a question about that, but I think he covered it very well, and just how it has to work for all types of users, including people who want good physical activity. So I actually changed my question, and what I'm going to ask is I wonder, and having Ricart up here, and should the car dealerships in Columbus possibly take a lead in leading the car sharing effort to help with those first mile, last mile efforts?
Absolutely. I'm a fan of ride sharing, but car sharing is coming up strong. And one of the things we have to fight is Our new vehicles are, vast majority are owned by a finance institution, and we have dealer agreements that we're not allowed to rent those vehicles. The used cars on our lots, they aren't titled yet, they aren't registered, so you can't legally rent them yet. The Uber model, or not Uber, Turo, which is person-to-person car sharing, I love that company. I love the idea. No one really wants to go to I don't want to use any rental car company names, but they generally buy fleet vehicles that are Class C. They don't have all the amenities and things. And I have a lot of friends that want to rent something that's out of the showroom floor that's a lot more like them. Maybe if you don't own a vehicle, but you want to go to the Hocking Hills for the weekend to see the leaves change, can you rent a four-door, Jeep or a Ford truck or something? So there's absolutely something on the table where we want to try to figure that out. I want to personally see if there's a way that we can make that another available option. So thank you for the question.
I mean, the loss of Car2Go was a significant loss for our community because it undercut mobility. The loss of Chariot was a loss in momentum around it. We at COTA are already making those smart investments to support a multimodal system. We're looking for the private sector to step up. Share has stepped up. Empower Bus, who, by the way, is based in the COTA building now, we appreciate that. It's always good to see Arseneault. It gets back to partnerships. We've got to work together. Public, private, nonprofit, everyone has got to work together to solve this challenge. And COTA is a major player in that conversation. So again, we're coming to you to talk, come to us to talk. We want to have this conversation, and we're ready. CPAS is a huge demonstration of a public-private initiative that has been immensely successful and will continue to be successful when we have bold leadership and policy decisions that will back it up and incentivize folks to make good choices.
All right, folks, we're going to leave it there. Great forum today. I know you learned a lot. One thing we did not learn, which we invite you to the lobby for coffee and cookies after this, is how in the heck Doug got that bookshelf in the smart car. But we'll come we'll come back to that at a different time. We certainly encourage you to stick around for a few minutes in the lobby. We want to thank again our sponsors for today, the Bob Weiler Company and MS Consultants. So thank them again for their support. And to this panel, Ryan, Doug, Rick, and Carrie, thank you so much for leading our discussion today. The conversation will continue. We'll see you soon. Thank you.